So yeah, thank you all very much for joining this webinar. I was just saying, despite the heat, despite obviously long days at schools, we really do appreciate you giving up your time to join us. I'm really pleased on behalf of Let's Go Zero to welcome our colleagues from the Net Zero Hub today, who are going to deliver a presentation around estate decarbonisation, something that I know a lot of you are already working on, and I know that a lot of you are interested to find more about. Before we sort of dive in, I will say, obviously, when we originally set up this webinar, the idea was to discuss PSDS funding. And we also spoke about an organisation called Mantis Energy, giving their perspective on how they could help schools. Obviously, nothing ever goes smoothly in education, does it? PSDS funding has since been removed, and Mantis Energy unfortunately couldn't make it today. But we've still got the Net Zero Hub, and it's still going to be a really valuable presentation, and you'll have lots of opportunities to ask questions around your setting and to identify further areas of support that you might need. So I really just encourage you to listen, but also use the chat, use the hand function later on in the meeting as well to ask lots of questions and make the most of the expertise in the room. So without further ado, I'll hand over to the colleagues at the Net Zero Hub. Marion.
Good afternoon all. I'm just going to share my presentation in Teams, if you can bear with me. So I'm Marion Kempson, Public Sector Decarbonisation Programme Manager for the North East and Yorkshire Net Zero Hub. And as Rob says, we're going to be talking about energy reduction as well as decarbonisation. So I thought, out of sympathy for everybody being here, I thought a picture of a swimming pool. I've been trying to make a connection with decarbonisation, but I just thought it might help us all to imagine a nice cool pool. This is actually an outside one, but the connection can be that we also work with, some other example of public sector buildings are obviously leisure centres where there's quite a lot of decarbonisation has happened. So just a very brief introduction to who the local net zero hubs are, and then I'll talk a bit more about our team. So there are, for those of you who don't know, there are 5 net zero hubs across England, fully funded by NESO's GB Energy. So any support is free. And the aim of the hubs is to accelerate and realise net zero ambitions, to build capacity and investment, and really a forum to aid understanding of local energy and net zero activity. So our team has been in place since January this year. We're a fairly new team. The other hubs have similar teams to ours across England. So as the name sort of states, really, we are here for anything to do with public sector decarbonisation and energy reduction. What we're looking at is taking a regional and strategic approach to addressing the challenges. To date, in many parts of the public sector, maybe slightly less so in schools, the organisations have been working really quite individually. And so we are beginning to share experience and knowledge across the region. So see that as really important. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of public sector organisations in the North East and Yorkshire. So we are working with regional organisations such as Let's Go Zero to see how we can provide support effectively. We are only a team of 3. So there's myself and Annie, who's on the call, and Callum, who's also on the call, who'll be looking at Slido questions later. We all have backgrounds in the public sector. I have a background in estate decarbonisation, both development and delivery of projects, as well as energy management. So just a really reminder, and it's why save energy in our schools. And what we have been looking at over the last month or 2, and it's been particularly focused because of the changes, and I'll come to that in a minute, is really the reduction, so cut carbon, cut costs, but actually saving energy in schools obviously saves carbon, but actually it does save fuel costs as well, and they are year on year. So annually, every year you save those fuel costs. It's not just a one-off saving. It also reduces risk and provides resilience. So the less energy you use, the more resilient you are to energy price increases, obviously the sort of energy crisis from a couple of years ago now. It also reduces the long-term cost of decarbonisation because you've got less to decarbonise. And of course, it does deliver net zero targets. But I think it's really important to see it in this context rather than just seeing it all about net zero, because there are lots of other, reasons to do it. So looking at the school estate, the schools in England spend approximately £1.6 billion a year on energy. And 50% of this is when the buildings are unoccupied. And you will find this is a theme that's going to go throughout my presentation today. So when the buildings are occupied, 50% of that energy is used. And our savings of around 10% can be achieved, 20% can be achieved without large capital investment. Obviously, that can very much vary. It can vary from 10%. I've even seen figures of 35%. And also from my own experience in implementing measures, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, that really significant savings can be had. And for those organisations that aren't doing that already, of which there are still many in the public sector, it's really important to look at these savings. And so they, as I said, these savings can be achieved through effective strategies, efficiency measures, data-driven decision-making, and robust energy and carbon reduction plans, which I'm going to say a little bit more about. So this spectrum is really showing that on the left, you have those things that you can do that save energy that don't actually cost money. So they're sort of management measures. And as I've mentioned, they are significant, and the low-cost measures are significant. And really what this is saying is, as you go across, you can reduce the energy costs, you reduce your carbon emissions. And really, it's only when you get to the right hand of the slide that there's an increase in capital cost. And really, that was where the PSDS came in terms of decarbonisation. But I do think PSDS, although it's a very good scheme, it has distracted a little from these other areas, and that's really where we need to look at in terms of our focus, as well as looking at decarbonisation. So you may be, some of you I'm sure are familiar with it, the hierarchy of energy use is, let's reduce first before we start to generate and decarbonise. So we're in a good place here to look at that. So this slide really includes the elements of what is needed to call it cut carbon, cut costs, to reduce the energy use, to reduce fuel costs, and to reduce carbon. And I'm just going to run through each of these elements in this sort of slide. I have separated monitoring and reporting out because it's sort of fundamental throughout the whole process, throughout the whole approach, and I'll be touching on that as well. So firstly, we need to understand our energy use, and we need to understand the energy use of our estate, of our buildings. So this is an example really of where energy is used in schools. It will vary from estate to estate, from school to school, but typically, you're looking at a large amount going into space heating and lighting. And it's just important. It's just a reminder, really, that what we don't want to do is focus all of our energies on that 1%, reducing that 1%. And it's really about understanding what are the key users of energy in the school. So one of the first steps is really to know and understand your buildings from an energy and carbon perspective. Where are the energy consuming equipment, or the energy saving equipment? What does each of your building have? So we can also share this. DESNZ has produced what's called a data capture form, which is really a place to pull together all of this information in terms of the energy use, as well as what lighting is in each building, what lighting controls, what heating, etc. Now, this is quite a big database, but what we're finding working, and we've started working with local authorities, is that actually you get the bare minimum in and then build on it as as time goes on. So really it's about pulling together and understanding that information. Of course, it depends how many buildings you have. If you've got a few hundred buildings, it would take a long time if you don't have that. But if you've got a small amount of buildings, it may be a lot easier. And also I talk a little bit at the end about how to kind of align this with existing databases of information. And I think certainly with the organisations we've been working with, they said it's kind of helpful to pull it all together in one place. So what I haven't said is I don't know if it's not quite Where's Wally, but I've got these little top tips jumping up in little places throughout the presentation. It's not subliminal, but it's just, I just thought I just wanted to sort of a real reminder about, it sounds really simple, but the top tips about turning off, if that's one message that can be taken away today, it's about turning off when equipment, when heating, when lighting isn't needed during the holiday, weekends, and turning off in the evening. So actually it is appropriate that it sits on the heating and controls, because often heating is on when it's not needed. It comes on an hour too early, or it switches off an hour later. So if you switch your heating off an hour earlier, you will save about 12% of your heating costs, of your energy and of your carbon. So really, and as I said, having visited many buildings and looked at the heating and controls, very often the settings of the controls, or it can be a building energy management system, or it can be a really simple control, then they're not optimized and they don't reflect the use of the building. Sorry, I'm just moving on. I hope I moved on. Okay, so again, lighting controls. I'm sure many of you will be aware, that these lighting controls, we tend to jump straight into LEDs, but actually it's the controls that can have the biggest savings. I've got pictures of classrooms here, but also corridors, presence detection in corridors, presence detection classrooms, daylighting control. So lighting controls, if we're looking at the low cost, low short payback measures, lighting controls are often one of those, as heating controls too, as well as looking at the lighting. The lighting technology has moved on considerably in the last few years, and it's really looking at what lighting you have in place and what you can put in. And then school building fabric, really another key measure, I think, in terms of what level of insulation. So I've seen schools that have actually got pitched roofs and they haven't got any insulation in, so where you could easily put insulation in. But also it's knowledge about the state of the roof is really important. And when we come to talk about solar, that's a really big issue. Is what state is the roof, but also what are the opportunities to insulate the building and increase the insulation on the building. And also I've mentioned solar PV. I mean, we're not going into in detail in this today, but if we consider that there's about 55 million square metres of roof area in the education estate, what we need to look at is the condition. And again, this is about knowledge about the buildings, which schools have roofs in a condition that can take solar. And obviously you've got the other aspects. What are the aspects of the roof? Which direction is the main roof facing, etc. But it's really, solar is obviously an absolutely key part of it too. Okay, so then let's move on to understanding energy use. So it's looking at this both if you're like a multi-academy trust and you've got quite a number of buildings, it's looking across the estate. So looking at the energy use of the estate as well as the energy use of individual school buildings. And it's looking, it's comparing your current use with historical use, so both annually. So this graph in the corner is looking at annual total annual emissions. So has it gone, is it going up? Is the trend right? Not looking too good in this picture, but is it going down? And then so as a minimum, looking at well, more than sort of really looking what beyond, much more beyond annually, but looking at the estate wide annually, looking quarterly, monthly, and then even daily. And I'll talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. And as I said, it's comparing it with the same period the previous year, if you're looking at quarterly, monthly, or quarterly or monthly. Okay, so I've put this box in as a really simple one. I've done it for quarterly. You could do it annually, you can do it monthly. So really, this is a simple figure, and it's saying, right, estate-wide, over the last quarter, have our emissions gone up or down? If they've gone up by 5%, that kind of rings alarm bells. So it's really simple information, but obviously quite a lot of effort can go into getting that simple information. But it's also communicating that across the school management and across teams. So that's on a quarterly basis. You can look at that, and then you can look on a monthly or again a quarterly basis. Look at individual buildings. Okay, so this school has gone up by 5%, or this school has gone down. What are the reasons for that? And it could be that there's been a setting has been changed, so you can pick up and really control when things have changed that have increased the electricity and gas usage. And then daily profile. So from half hourly data, you can produce a daily profile. And I show this because in terms of if this data is available, and that's something you can look at in terms of metering, if you're, it depends how far down the road you are, but certainly looking at getting half hourly meters in. So I didn't have one. I don't think these are of schools, but if you look at this, the one on the left top corner, the orange one, that's kind of giving you the profile where you can see it's night, and then it's about 4 or 5 in the morning, the electricity use begins to rise, and then it reaches sort of a plateau and then goes down at the end of the day. Now that's how kind of the sort of the simple smooth profile. I will say a little bit about this bit, the sort of the load where it's starting from, but just firstly to compare it to the one on the right, I tried to find where it's all over the place, and you're thinking what's happening here. And I have found when I shows these to estate or building managers, they will say, why have we got a peak at 3 in the afternoon? And they will know the building and be able to relate it, or they may not, and that indicates that there's an issue. So daily profiles really give you a really strong picture of the school. So if, for example, you look in the bottom left-hand corner on the profiles, the green line, if you can see it, it's starting when it's out of hours. It's actually showing a really high usage, and it's looking at how do we get that usage down. And in fact, even for all of them, it's how do we get that out of hours usage down. Okay, so we've talked about understanding the energy use in the building. Then it's like let's develop a form of an energy reduction plan. Now, this can take lots of forms depending on how many buildings you have and where you are in the journey. I'm going to talk about energy walk rounds in a minute. Everybody can do energy walk rounds, but you could consider having energy audits, or we have found that some schools have already had energy audits, or they've got a heat decarbonisation plan, which has got some elements of energy in there. And what they give you is they give you an indication of the saving and the capital cost, and therefore the payback of various measures. So if you look in the circle, for example, I'm not saying these are great examples, but if you put presence detection on, you can get savings of £370 and an estimated payback of 1.6. And these can then inform your financial case and really sort of show a prioritised projects and pull those together into a energy reduction plan. Alongside this, you can also obviously include the decarbonisation side of that plan. So if you were looking at the heat pump, so that's where heat decarbonisation plan, as they're known, would give you that information. So this is an energy walk around checklist. As I said, if nothing else, you can look at having an energy walk around checklist, and this kind of comes back to that, making sure that things are turned off, for example. So I'm just going to hand over to Callum, who's got a 2 or 3 Slido questions, just to sort of get some information and feedback from you, and then I'll come back to me in a few minutes. Callum,
yeah, thank you,
are you
Marianne.
with us? Yeah,
Thank
Callum.
you. Hi everyone. So my colleague Annie, she's just popped a link in the chat. So if everyone is able to join that link, we'll just go over some Slidos. So it's basically just asking you 3 quick questions, and you can just fill them out, and we can kind of discuss what your answers and kind of see what it is that some of the barriers that you are facing when it comes to decarbonisation. So the first question is, what net zero strategy / delivery plans do you have within your organisation, if any, and is it effective? So if everyone is able to just type up a response for that, and we can see them show up here. Thank you. Yes, so we've got our first response here, limited plans as yet and early in the process. Thank you. Just to that response, do you know of any tentative plans, or do you know where to kind of begin working on that? Yeah, energy related targets for is that a climate action plan? I would assume. Thank you. Yeah, climate action plan with elements of decarbonisation. This response about MATs. Could you just expand on what you mean by that? Sorry, I'm not familiar with that. Rob?
Sorry, Callum, that was me, and I missed out the word few in there. I didn't realise it was going to be anonymous. So I was just saying the mats that I've encountered and worked with a lot, most people sort of very early stages might have a trust climate action plan, climate action strategy, but sort of early stages of a net zero strategy as part of that.
Thank you, Rob. So solar, we've had insurance and structure teams denied due to issues with pre-risk leaks. Right. Auto lighting, taps auto switch off, LED lighting. So yeah, that's some of the stuff we've kind of covered already through this presentation. I'll just give a few more moments for responses, and then we'll move on to the next question. Thank you. I can see someone still typing. We can see here as well, the climate action plan seems to be a bit of a trend throughout responses as well. So that's quite interesting. Thank you. Great, thank you. I think that's all responses. So we'll move on to the next question, which is, what are the key challenges in terms of reducing energy and decarbonising your buildings? Again, so if you just want to have a think and type out your responses, and yeah, we'll just go over a few of those. Funding, yeah. I think that's probably going to be a theme here as well. Again, just waiting for some more responses, and then we'll move on to the next question. Yeah, funding again, age of buildings. Yeah, obviously lots of barriers around decarbonising old buildings. consumption patterns. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, everyone. Just wait for these final responses to come through, and then we'll move on to the next question. Great, I think that's everything. Thank you. And then, so what decarbonisation / energy reduction measures have you installed, if any, and which ones have worked, and how are you monitoring their success? LED lighting, thank you. Yeah. So like we were saying, kind of reducing that initial consumption. LED again, yeah. Installation. Yeah, LED seems to be quite popular, which is very interesting. So building management settings and temperature settings to reduce costs. Yeah, definitely that reducing that consumption initially. I'll just wait for this final response, and then we'll move on. Thank you. Lighting again, yeah. I'll just move on from this, but this poll will still be open, so those final few responses can keep just popping their answers in there. And I'll hand you back over to Marion for now. Thank you, everyone.
You're on, yeah.
I'm off mute now. Thanks, Callum. Some very interesting answers. It's interesting that LED lighting always seems to come up at the top of the list. It's interesting, quite often LED lighting is installed with controls as well, and the controls can make big savings. And it's good to see some BEMS controls going in as well and looking at the controls. So I do encourage you to keep looking at the controls as well. Okay, so I think it's all very well having a strategy, but it's making it work. And I hope I've given some ideas about where it works. But I think it's also about where does the strategy sit. What we don't want is strategies to sit on the shelves and gather dust. And I think one of the things is to look at embedding, and certainly with other public sector organisations, beginning to look at if the estates, so quite often somebody looking at climate change in estates can be different teams almost. And it's, how can we embed this in what happens anyway? So that what is going on anyway within the organisation? Because in some way, rather than creating something completely new, it's looking for how does it fit in? How can it go alongside? So, for example, if we're looking at when I talked about collecting the building data and information on the building, if that's aligned with sort of the review of buildings, so an asset review, it's a much more effective way. So it's really about thinking about how this can be embedded within the process. And also looking at engagement. So another really key factor about the success of these projects is having engagement, not just at senior level, but at all levels. So the financial team, I've mentioned the school management, but also the estates team and caretakers, if they are engaged and really see it from their perspective and see the benefit, then it's really important. So it's and also staff. In fact, I haven't put children out here, have I? So as well. So yeah, these are just some examples. So it's really the engagement, and what we have been doing with public sector organisations is kind of saying, between these four walls, can you carry out, look at who, look at your, look at your stakeholders, and say who is engaged, who isn't, and what do we need to do to get them engaged? What is the message that we need to get across? Alongside that, senior support is also important, having the clear roles and responsibilities, and that links strongly to the monitoring and reporting. So who looks, or what people look at the energy and whether it's gone up by 5% or not? How is that reported, and how is that flagged if it's the energy use is not reducing, or it's gone up by 5%, 10%? How is the action plan being delivered and managed? And some of this can be sort of really done in a fairly, it does not have to be a complex process, but it's having that in place, which is where the reporting is also really useful. And then the big question is the funding. So I think, firstly, before we jump straight into the funding, I think we have to remember, just to remind us, and I know I keep saying it, but there is lots that can be done that doesn't cost anything. It just takes some time and some processes and systems in place for reporting. There is also measures that can be done that have got, payback in sometimes less than a year, sometimes between 1 or 2 years, which I think if that's presented, that's still a really, that's still a really effective way of going. And then, of course, I'm sort of moving across that spectrum. So then we're moving through the sort of the longer payback savings, and then the decarbonisation. So what we are now looking at, now that PSTS isn't here, isn't in place, or certainly the projects that have been funded are continuing, but there's not another PSTS this year, is really looking at other options. And one area that we're looking at is being able to ring fence the energy savings. So I know that's very difficult in a school environment where you're desperate for the money, but possibly even just a small part of them, so that you at least get a little bit of something that you can then reinvest, half of it, quarter of it, just to get a little bit of money sort of ring fence that you can then invest and then show bigger savings, and sort of get those 1-2 year payback periods. So that's one side of it. In terms of the wider, the big, really significant costs, such as the heat pumps and decarbonisation, we are also looking at, what are the other options? Where can we go next? And the whole of the public sector and others are. But also there is a local partnerships refit. It's not been launched yet, so I can't say much about it, but it's been relaunched. So it's an energy performance contracting where you can get guaranteed energy and cost savings, and we will certainly be providing more information about that. So that's something that we're really looking into to support public sector organisations in the region, because we know that funding is a really big challenge. I think I'll do the final thoughts, then I'll hand over back to Callum for a couple more Slidos. So the final thoughts are just a reminder to switching off for 1 hour can save 12%, reducing temperatures by 1 degree can save 10% of heating costs, effective BMS, monitoring and smart metering. So it's really making sure that we've got all of those savings on that left side of the spectrum that I showed you, really there and in place. Looking at the, so talking about embedding, so the set points for controls. So if you've got a building management system, you may have somebody in to check the set points. So they may just check that they are working, but actually what they need to be doing is to make sure that they check that they are also set correctly as well. So that's the kind of embedding in it. And then finally, I thought embed and share learning. And so what we're finding with other public sector organisations, that there is a wealth of knowledge out there, that one organisation may be doing something that another isn't, and so we have really begin to share that learning from each other. And then I think just to put out we've got some resources which we'll send out to you, and obviously I know that Rob has at Let's Go 002, but there are certainly resources, and we'd certainly be happy to hear your ideas of how we can support, from a sort of a more strategic perspective as well. So if I can just hand over back to Callum, I know you've got a couple more Slidos, and really, if you've got ideas as well, do put them in the chat if they don't come up in the Slidos too.
Thank you, Marianne. Yeah, we've got another Slido. This one will be a bit quicker. So if everyone could just join through the link that Annie's just sent in the chat, it is a separate link to the first one. And hold on a second while I just share my screen. Sorry. There we go. Thank you. So yeah, our first question here, this one you don't need to type, you should just be able to vote. So in terms of capacity, knowledge and skills, how prepared for net zero delivery is your organisation? 1 being not all and 5 being very. So this isn't necessarily speaking about funding, because obviously we understand that is a really big issue, but just in terms of other support that we can offer, yeah, how prepared would you say your organisation is? So quite in the middle, which is very interesting, but we are slightly leaning more towards not very prepared in terms of capacity, knowledge and skills. If that's everybody, then we'll just move on to the next question, which is an open question. So what knowledge, resources or support would your organisation need in order to deliver energy and carbon savings? So again, we're not specifically looking at funding here, although we do acknowledge that is obviously a huge barrier for most public sector organisations. But in terms of any other kind of support that could be there to help on that journey, any suggestions as to what that might be? So leading and offering advice, energy auditing and monitoring. Yeah, very useful. Energy auditing. Roadmap of actions, yeah. This is interesting. Staff schemes. It's a very interesting suggestion. Yeah, so training and optimizing BMS systems. As Marion has said, we do have some resources available, to help with like knowledge or mapping out what kind of actions you can implement. They are in the presentation, and we do have a wider document that will be circulated with the presentation slides. So do check that out, because there are some really useful free resources in there that can just help cut off those initial energy waste. EV charging, yeah, training and understanding, yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Again, this will be open. If you have any more thoughts, do feel free to just pop some on. But just to speed things up a little bit, I'll just stop sharing there and pass back over to Rob. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I was just popping in the chat just before I carry on with my section around the question around the EV salary sacrifice schemes. So there's just a latest update from the Academy handbook there, and it basically says there's no news yet. So more details to follow, but there was a temporary pause placed on multi-academy trusts setting up those salary sacrifice schemes for their employees. So as advisors, we'll let you know if we hear any updates, but yeah, no news at the moment. Yeah, big thank you to Callum and Marion for the section there around decarbonisation in schools. I think really, really useful. I think we probably all were a little bit frustrated when we heard the news around PSDS being cancelled, and then thinking about whether schools need funding and how do we get this funding now. But I think you've done a really good job there, the Net Zero team, of making us sort of readjust and rethink. It could be an opportunity. It's an opportunity to focus on taking stock of what we've got already in terms of our estate, but it's also an opportunity to look at making sure those savings in terms of behaviour change and low and no cost interventions have really been maximised. So I think in terms of next steps, it's just really a reminder to focus on those things so that when and if new funding gets announced, number one, it's the right amount of funding because you've reduced it to a certain level, but also number two, it's focused on the right area. And I'm more thinking here about the MAT leads in this call, thinking about, your schools and taking a true stock of what you have and where that funding is going to be best placed if and when we find out more details of it. So in terms of my section now, it was just really a brief overview of how the net zero hub work could fit in with the Let's Go Zero work that some of you have already started. So I know there's lots of fantastic things already taking place in your schools. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to clarify really how we fit together and how we're here to support you on your decarbonisation journey in your setting. So both organisations free, both organisations independent, and both organisations here to help. So if you need anything at all, do please get in touch. But one of the things I think I'd emphasise from what we've heard already today is do take the opportunity while we're waiting for clarification around next steps to look at making sure you've got a whole organisation or whole school approach to decarbonisation. I tend to find as an advisor, people I work with, you might have maybe an estates focused person who's more looking at the building and decarbonisation that way, or you might have a member of teaching staff that's looking at engaging the students and the staff with energy reduction. Both great, both really important, but sometimes difficult to make sure that you've got everyone within a school involved in that process. So do consider and do reflect on how you could start to embed that in your setting, or I know, like I said, some of you have done that already, so how you could take that to the next step, because we do find that whole school and that whole setting approach to be much more impactful. So in terms of next bits, I won't go through the benefits of climate action because we've already heard those today and you're already committed to it by the fact that you've joined this call. So I think instead what I'll say to you is a big thank you for your commitment to decarbonisation in terms of saving money for your organisation, but also engaging your students and your staff with this process. It's not only going to help climate change and the environment, but it's also going to inspire change in your communities and your areas. So a big thank you for that. In terms of the sort of rough roadmap, we've already heard some ideas there about how you could go about that, sort of starting off with the behaviour change, low and no cost interventions, moving towards the larger projects. So I've put my own roadmap here. It's nowhere near as fancy as the diagram we saw, but we'd always recommend some sort of baseline, looking at where you are at the moment. And County Carbon is a free tool for schools to baseline their carbon emissions, which we'd recommend if you've not looked at already. In terms of the low, no cost intervention and the sort of behaviour change, Let's Go Zero and our partner organisations are here to help. So there's loads on that slide there, and sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. So if you do need a bit of help sort of navigating, I want to focus on this, who do I need to speak to? Just get in touch with your local advisor or your local climate ambassador, and we can help you, point you in the direction of where you can get some support for your journey. So I'd really encourage you to make the most of those organisations that are out there. Like I said, mostly free, some low cost associated as well. And then the sort of larger project is where the expertise from the Net Zero Hub cross over with us. There's definitely a lot of overlap between the two organisations. Both can offer advice over all areas of decarbonisation, but definitely we sort of bow to the Net Zero Hub's knowledge over the larger decarbonisation projects. So we can refer between the organisations, and if one of us doesn't know the answer, I'm sure we can get some help and get some support for you in your setting. So I just encourage you, like I said, to access that support, to ask the questions that you might need to ask. I thought about other opportunities that you can access, again, while you're thinking about losing out on funding, but what else can you access? So a couple of other ideas here that came up with different schools I've worked at. So if you are interested in EV chargers, don't forget there is a government grant at the moment for education institutions, 75% off the cost of a charger, with some certain limitations on that. So do look into that if that's interesting for your organisation. So that's grant funding. If you're looking at maybe your catering contract coming up in a few months, I'd encourage you to look at organisations like ProVeg, which do sort of rankings of different caterers and their sustainability offer. So looking for those sort of independent views on sustainability with the different contractors that you're going to use. As the team have already said, one of the big actions that you can take over the next few weeks is reducing your energy usage over the summer holidays. So we've had a great checklist there, which will be shared. Energy Sparks have a free to access template as well, which you can tweak, but do either speak to your schools if you're a multi-academy trust, or if you're a standalone school, start to make that checklist yourself to make sure you're saving as much money and as much energy and as much carbon as possible over summer. Another one here, in terms of energy bills, if you're concerned that you might have overpaid at any point, there's a claim back service through the DFE, which you can look into for some more details. So for example, if you've recently converted to become an academy, schools tend to pay 20% VAT on their energy bills and pay a climate change sort of levy. Academies pay 5% and don't pay the climate change levy. So it might be that you've slightly overpaid during that process, and there might be some savings to be made there if you look back on those energy bills. So certainly something I'd encourage you to look into. And there's quite a lot on the DFE website actually around different things that schools can access. And obviously some more details hopefully to follow in different schemes that are being released. And if in doubt, like I said, speak to any of those organisations that I mentioned earlier on. Your Climate Action Advisor can help as well, find you some support. We've got our sister organisations, the Climate Ambassadors, the Nature Park. If you're looking at biodiversity, the support is there. So please do have access it. And I've just seen a comment from John there. So 2 primary schools working overspent by £1,000 on electricity last summer, and that could push some significant rewards. So yeah, if we're thinking about getting some money ring fenced for further action, maybe looking back at your energy bills and seeing if there's any overpayments there could be another option to get some money back for that. So that's really it from me. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time saying how Let's Go Zero and the Net Zero Hub can sort of fit together. And then just to mention the real sort of benefit from my point of view of schools taking this action and multi-academy trusts or your organisations that you're representing is that sort of wider impact we can have on the communities. So you hear lots in the news around net zero and different people's opinions on that, but we know it can make those buildings better learning environments for our students. We know it can save money for the organisations, and I think taking that action in schools and taking the opportunity to share what you're doing with your pupils, your staff and your wider communities is a really important aspect of this journey, because it can have, countless impacts when it's rolled out into the local area. So I'd really encourage you to spend some time thinking about how the messaging and how you can communicate what you're doing to your stakeholders, as well as obviously taking the actions that you are doing. So that's everything from me. We've got now sort of 9 minutes remaining for questions. Please feel free to put them in the chat or to put your hand up and ask them verbally. And now we can sort of facilitate that and get you some support and ask those questions. So over to you guys really to ask any questions you may have. If you need to dash off now, if it's getting too warm in the school building, you need to go into your air-conditioned car or something or get home, then please do that and get in touch later on. But otherwise stick around and do please ask those questions. So over to you. While people are thinking, probably a question for Marion really, are there any sort of insights from your point of view around the future of funding for public organisations and schools? If you probably don't want to say too much around that, but from our point of view, it seems to be probably a positive picture. We're expecting more announcements, more support. Would that be fair to say?
Unfortunately, it's very difficult to, really say. I think we're waiting to see in terms of the decarbonisation from heat decarbonisation. I think most people on the call will be aware of the GB Energy solar projects that are coming through. Apart from that, I'm afraid there's not much else that I can say at the moment. But there are certainly going to be quite a few changes on the horizon with GB Energy really getting up to speed too. So yeah, and as soon as we know anything, we'll tell you, Rob, and communicate it through to the public sector organisations in the area. So yes.
Thank you very much. That was a very diplomatic answer. I was hoping for some admissions there, but no, appreciate that we're having to wait for more information, and we'll let
Yeah,
you know when we hear more. So thank you for that. Any further questions? If not, then we will end the meeting there. So thank you all very much for your time, and a big thank you to colleagues at the Net Zero Hub for presenting there and giving your expertise. And the very best to everyone that's obviously been here today, but obviously listening online as well in the future. Do please get in touch if you need any support. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
thank you.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.